Hello, everybody. This is Roger Durling, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and I am beyond excited to welcome production designer David Wasco and set decorator Sally Reynolds Wasco, who have shaped the look and feel of such major films, including La La Land, which earned them a well-deserved Academy Award. The two have collaborated with Quentin Tarantino, from the sparsely decorated warehouse of Reservoir Dogs to the period German sets of Inglourious Basterds. They also applied their precise touch to such Wes Anderson films as Bottle Rocket, Rushmore, and The Royal Tenenbaums. Other work they've done for directors known for their demanding visions include Collateral with Michael Mann and Heist for David Mamet. Because of their architectural and design expertise, the Wascos has even collaborated on exhibits for the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, as well as the Smithsonian. Sandy and David, welcome. Thank you for doing this. I am so excited to talk with you guys.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, you have built a career working with really strong directors, from Michael Mann, David Mamet, Aaron Sorkin, Wes Anderson, Damien Chazelle. Is this something that you guys laser focus? You want to work with really strong directors?
Well, I think that we kind of set out on a career path to take on script-driven projects. And that doesn't necessarily mean projects that will be big, splashy art direction that would showcase our craft, but to find projects that are well-written. And our early career kind of had a taste of that, that set us in a direction where we started to understand that it's really, that's the blueprint for what we do. It's a good story and a well-written script. And then that translated into, we don't get to, even now in our career, we don't get to just say, okay, this is what we would like to do. We have to go after something and interview and pursue something and try to get something. So I can say that we've been a little picky maybe, but by doing so, we connected with Quentin, we connected with Dave Mamet, Wes Anderson. When Aaron Sorkin chose to do his first movie that he directed, he reached out to us. We did
Molly's Game.
It was a good movie. And a lot of people still don't know what art direction is or what we do. And I guess in a nutshell, it's when you have a story, there has to be someone or a team of people that then translate that story into physical, either a location or a piece of scenery that's behind the actors that then gets filmed. And that's what our job is. We get to kind of quietly work with a director. And in a lot of the case with what we've done, the director is the writer as well. So that's kind of.
Yeah, I think it's far more complicated than what you just mentioned, David, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You guys are able to grab the director's vision and you synthesize it into a compelling visual world. You decide on colors, on themes, and other visual elements that best evoke the emotions, the themes, the actions of each scene and the project as a whole. So,
yeah, I mean, because we started at the beginning with both Wes and Quentin, we started at the beginning with them at the beginning of their careers. So we started out with sort of very minimal budgets, and their first projects Reservoir Dogs and Bottle Rocket were very simple, a little more simple and contained than their later work. And we were able to really focus on what was important with the storytelling. It was hugely important to the two of them, especially to Quentin. It's the dialogue and his actors and the storyline, and Wes as well. But the say with Reservoir Dogs, if you're just, it's a little more than just that warehouse, but you do think about the color, and you do think about how these actors are all going to look within a color of a room, and what kind of a warehouse is this? This turned out to be a mortuary because it kind of suited these fellows, but it works in step by step that way.
But it's also not just the scenery. It goes down to minutia. It under the umbrella of the art direction is the prop department. So it's little things, and the little things were actually just as important to people like Wes, who would be concerned with the type of eraser that was on the end of a pencil, or Michael Mann would anguish over, Michael Mann was very visual and very concerned about everything. And it's interesting, I may be wrong, but he uses a production designer once. So every single movie he uses a different production designer. We were lucky to do one, whereas
And why do you think, David, why do you think he does that? That he only chooses?
I don't know. I think that, I mean, personally, I think that, like my friend Neil Spizak, who designed Heat, which I love. I think it's a great movie
terrific.
about LA. Oh my God. But I don't know. Last of the Mohicans, these are great movies. And now, whereas Quentin, I think that we developed a rapport where they just they just trusted us, and we just went off and did our thing like Quentin was able to focus on the actors and the blocking and he didn't worry about the art direction. Mm-hmm. Now Wes is almost overly concerned about the art direction. But he trusted us to carry us through 3 movies, which we were very, very fortunate to do. I still think maybe Royal Tenenbaums is his best movie. And
we love
that. Amazing movie.
I love that film.
Bottle Rocket is so pure and simple and funny and wonderful. And we got to work with another production designer, Polly Platt, who was hired as a producer. She was Jim Brooks's kind of point person producer put in charge of running Bottle Rocket. As a matter of fact, she was the one that discovered the short that Wes and the Wilson brothers, Owen and Luke, brought to, I think they brought it to Sundance or Telluride, I'm not sure, but they brought a 10-minute short, and she saw that there and said, this could make a great movie. So she brought that back to Jim Brooks, and that's how the movie got made. But we got to work with our hero production designer who did Last Picture Show. Polly was married to Peter Bogdanovich and has done some amazing movies, Paper Moon, and
we were lucky to start with them again when they were Wes and Quentin, for example, when they were starting, because as they progressed, we progressed, and as their storytelling got more sophisticated, we of course followed along with that, and because we knew a little bit about their language from the early films, it became
easier to do the next one.
Right.
It became
Do you think that you were responsible to help them shape their look and feel of?
Well, yes and no. I think that in the case with like
Quentin, maybe yes, Wes,
yes,
maybe
Quentin. I'm saying I'm agreeing with Sandy. Wes really had a vision, even early on. He was like a young guy, 20 something. Yeah. Now, I would say the same about Damien Chazelle. Damien really has had a vision. As a matter of fact, it was interesting because I went together a look book, which is I read the script and then I put together images of what I think the movie should look like. And often it'll feature some of the other movies that I've worked on that apply. And when I went in, Damien had actually had a lookbook because he was actually having to do the same thing with the project. He was having to take around this story to the studios and say, I want to make a musical. And everybody was saying, you know, a musical, why? We can't make it. Why are we going to make a musical? Nobody wants to see a musical. But I went in with my lookbook and Damien's lookbook, and we had a lot of the same pictures. It was very funny.
Yeah.
It was,
Wow.
and another very funny story that I won't go too off the path here.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
We were doing Royal Tannenbaums in New York City, and I always try to, you know, if a student or somebody tries to or wants to come on the set, you know, I'll invite them and whatever. But in any event, the art director at the time, Carl Sprague, who I've done, actually Carl did some great concept illustrations for La La Land. So we worked together a lot. But Carl said, you know, my neighbor friend in Western Massachusetts, he's a student and he's a young filmmaker and he wants to come on the set. So I take him around the Tannenbaum house, walk around. That was Damien Chazelle. Damien was
Oh my goodness.
12 years old or something. No, he was 18, I think, or 16.
Mm.
I didn't, he said that after I interviewed with him, he said, you don't remember this, but you took me around the Tannenbaum house. Do you
That's
believe
great.
that? Isn't that a weird
Wow.
coincidence?
That
Yeah.
is, yes,
That's
it
the
was,
honest truth. It's
well,
very funny.
it
So-
comes full circle. You guys were meant to work together. On that though, you know, let's take a look, because this is a visual medium we're talking about. And I think people, let's treat them to a clip to La La Land.
Okay,
So they get a taste of your work.
okay.
I just heard you play, and I want to.
It still gives me goosebumps to watch.
A lot of fun.
Sandy and David, this movie it's a love letter to Los Angeles. And one of the things, and even watching that clip, is that it taps into the what all Hollywood movies evokes to us about Los Angeles as well. Can you tell us about your approach to it? This was a very complicated production design.
Well, we kind of pride ourselves in being kind of unofficial historians about the city. I mean, that's our hobby. And that's
You've worked
what
in
we
a
do.
lot of Los Angeles movies, starting
I
with
think we've done 13 movies where the city it becomes a backdrop of the movie of the movie, and it's one of the reasons why I think Damien reached out to us. So we read this script and we're like, this is a great way to showcase the city, and people always think that, well, there have been so many movies shot in LA and everything's been shot out. And we always take the attitude that there's still things to be discovered and still things that have not been used in movies. That said, I don't mind using something that's been used in a movie before. I think that, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but we had this opportunity to showcase, to open up the Angel's Flight, which was shut down, the little Bunker Hill railroad train ride, the Watts Towers. A lot of that was depicted kind of in kind of a cartoon fashion towards the end. But Damien really wanted to use a mix of, and Damien loved LA and was kind of still smitten by the city when he moved there, and he wanted the practical locations to kind of look somewhat fake, and then he wanted the sets, and we built a lot of sets, to look very real. So we kind of melded that together, and he liked the incongruous juxtaposition of how LA is almost like Disneyland, in that there are a lot of buildings that are kind of fake old, and then there's postmodern stuff, and then there's Frank Gehry stuff, and it all kind of works together, and it's all kind of wonderful, and it's ever changing. But what we are lucky to do is to capture the city, and I think that we did in 2015 when we shot La La Land. We capture a certain period that then is forever. It's on film forever, and it's kind of like some of these movies that we watch and love, like Double Indemnity, that it brings you back to the 30s and 40s, and that's how LA was. And in many ways, we get to capture what the city was like, that then is ever changing. We're part of the Society of Architectural Historians, and we try to save things that are being torn down, that are important. But that's the natural evolution and progress of.
But the joy of doing this was exactly, I think it was the joy that Damien had coming to Los Angeles, with his intent to be a filmmaker and his sort of training in the background. We came and discovered or felt the same way about LA when we got here. I came here sort of late 20s. So there was a whole history of what I expected LA to be, from starting with like Laurel and Hardy Staircases to shows like Chips. I mean, and then all through the lexicon of Singing in the Rain and all those films. So it was such a magical thing to be able to bring all of that to bear on sort of a modern retelling of it. And you couldn't help but reach back to things in, it's not Top Hat, but the older films. And we looked at, of course, a lot of them.
Every musical.
So you'd pick bits and be influenced by bits, but mostly I think Damien came to it already full of those bits. And then we did too, because of our love of the city and love of cinema. I mean,
But it's interesting, when we worked on La La Land, we sensed that we had something, and there was a spark, and there was this exuberant enthusiasm that Damien had every day. Quentin had that on Reservoir Dogs. We had fun doing Reservoir Dogs. It was so much fun, and there was this just spark. And when we did Pulp Fiction, we had the same thing. We knew we had something. It was definitely interesting, and definitely we had that feeling when we were doing La La Land. And it's not always the case on every single movie. Everything converges, and everything is a perfect storm, and everything works. And it is a collaboration. It's like what I had mentioned, that good art direction is really good cinematography. And my friend Bob Yeoman, who shot all of the Wes Anderson movies, he said, good art direction is good camera work. And it's like everybody working together. And it's the most collaborative art form of our time, I think.
Mhm.
It's
Cindy, I going back to La La Land and the set decorating. I want to focus on the apartment. It's an example of we find out so much about who she is, about the way the things in the apartment, the Ingrid Bergman poster, even the color of the pillows in her bed. Can you talk about the set decorating?
Yeah, it was tricky. The set decorating, that house started out being something we thought we might build, but because of the money, it was no. So we found this wonderful penthouse that apparently Gable and then later Reagan lived in now a kind of a dilapidated part of LA. But it was fantastic for the dance scene that comes down the corridor. So we started with the palette of the different rooms. And then I knew when the dance scene started that we'd have these very vibrant 4 women in colored dresses. So I wanted to make sure that maybe the dresses referred to their rooms. So there would be a red dress, a red room, a yellow dress, a yellow room, that kind of thing. So that kind of mapped it out. And it was kind of a lucky thing because it made it instantly a musical. We knew we were we're in a film that's not really reality, but there was a touch of it that could possibly be the home of 4 young women in LA, all with dreams. And so there's a fantasy to it. And there was a little bit of influence. I found Damien in his art research and art recommendations. He had a lot of, Rouchet, and he did have a lot of Hockney paintings, more of the landscapes, the Mulholland type landscapes. But I found one of an interior with a beautiful red striped couch.
It was a Hockney painting.
And I just thought it was a sketch. It was lovely. And I just thought, this is what this needs. And that sort of started the living room. And then then bring in the greens, bring in the reds, bright colors for these bright young women. And also the furniture, that some of the smaller pieces of furniture had a slightly French influence to them. Delicate little metal chairs that they're sitting at a table that will refer later to her aunt in the Parisian story that happens later. And then the bedroom with the big photograph, that was something Damien always wanted. And to figure out how to really explain it, I mean, how would she have this marvelous thing in her room? That we decided that it was a part of a larger piece and that she just had this section and it would fill her wall.
One of her plays. Because in the early incarnation of the movie, we actually did a full play that Mia
But the art, it's funny in that case, just to finish that one thought, is it developed slowly with finding the pieces and putting together a little bit of what Damien suggested and then collaborating with costumes, the colors and the sets.
Yeah.
Now, I want to move on because there's so much to cover here.
Sure.
You work with Michael Mann in Collateral, which also happens to be an LA story, but a completely, different style, different themes. I want to share with our audience a clip from Collateral.
What the hell? Damn it. My man, you all right? Oh, shit. Fuck. Hey, he fell on the cab. He fell from up there on the motherfucking cab. Oh, shit. I think he's dead. Good guess. killed him?
No, I shot him. Bullets in the fall killed him.
Oh, man, fuck this, man.
Red light, Max.
Hold on.
Put your hands down. Put your hands down.
Okay.
Okay, help me out. Pop the trunk.
What?
Pop the trunk.
What you doing?
I'm gonna roll him off the roof.
Huh?
Can't leave him here, so unless you want him up front with you, but given the hygiene... Okay, it's only a dead guy. Grab his hands.
I can't do this.
Grab his wrists. You got it?
He's twitching and shit.
I've always loved this movie because you always see the skyline of Los Angeles and reminds you is that we are in Los Angeles. This, I mean, for our viewers, this looks like it must have been very simple. You went on location, you find an apartment, and you shot the scene. That is not the case. David, can you tell us about the work that went behind?
First of all, Collateral, I believe, was the very first digitally shot movie. Movies were always shot on 35 millimeter film. This was the first digital movie. And because the entire movie takes place at night, we had the benefit of filming digitally, which means that you're able to capture light easier. But what happened was the lighting responsibility that often is the lighting department went onto the shoulders of the decorating department. So we would be bringing around street lights, and so we were kind of feeling our way out with how a movie is shot digitally. But Michael is very, very specific about the locations, and what drove us to that spot was the alleyway, which had your view of downtown skyline. So this was not digitally enhanced or visual effects. It was all in camera, how it really looked. But what ended up looking like a simple assassination in an apartment where then a body drops onto the cab ended up being 4 different locations where you have Tom Cruise walking to the apartment, which was one location, and then completely across town,
Four-story location.
where the alley happened to have very low buildings. So we actually had to build an entire floor on top of a funky old apartment building, which then allowed camera to look down and show that it was high enough to do this. So it was many different things altogether that, and then you see in a kind of a fleeting second, Tom Cruise walking by an apartment where the door is open. Michael would have us do things. We would scout a location, and Michael would say, "Sandy, I like that one apartment. I want everything from that apartment brought to this other location here and set up." So he was very, very specific about everything. So everything was so thought out and measured. He would block a chair in a certain area, and we would have to measure it, and then come back 3 months later when we're filming, and the chair would have to be in exactly the same spot. So it was an exercise in working with this master director that we value. And I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, no, that's right. But before this scene, you see Tom Cruise walking through an apartment building towards his victim, and it's a long kind of slow process. More night background, more passing windows, and you can tell that he's up on the 3rd or 4th floor at this point. Goes into the apartment, the fall out of the window, and then we're on this beautiful location where throughout this movie, Michael is finding these beautiful nighttime locations, but this location didn't have a 4-story building.
Yeah.
So you had to
I
build
will
one.
also say, we anguished over the cab. The cab became an important set in the movie where you're inside the cab, and the exterior of the cab was very important. So the color, we did test and paint the cab over 50 times to get to
Wow.
the right color. And it ended up being a color that appeared 2 different shades of orange. If you look at it, it was a metallic, a metal flake type color. And also it was, because we did the movie a number of years ago, he wanted to be a kind of a futuristic cab thing where the cab topper had the ads, and he wanted the ads to be changing. Now, this is a common thing that you see. You don't see cabs anymore, but,
That's right.
it was something that we had to kind of invent at the time. And we even invented a type of way of lighting where there were, it was lighting tape. It was tape that became luminescent, and that adhered to the top of the cab interior. And that was the way everything was lit. So it was again, this collaboration between camera and all the other departments. I will also say this was, I shouldn't say it was a throwaway movie, but Michael was waiting to do Miami Vice, which was a bigger budget, bigger thing. And in the downtime, he took on this smaller movie that we shot in a relatively frugal budget. I mean, it wasn't a micro budget like some of the things that we've worked on, but the way it turned out and how it was received was way bigger than what we all anticipated. And it became a very important movie about LA, which is interesting.
It's a good story. It again is all Michael's nighttime, his love of the night. He uses that in a lot of movies. Great music that he uses all the time. And I remember in anticipation, we were a little nervous about working with Michael because his precision shows in all of his films. So we watched all of his movies, and you could tell that it's funny how all directors have a different approach, but his very crisp and very important interior architecture and light and perspectives, very important to him. His framing is really important. So we were so knowing that, everything we went into and for design always had that in the back of our heads.
And, going back to the point that you brought up earlier, David, about that this film was done very quickly, which process do you enjoy better? Something like this that moves very quickly, or the Damien Chazelle that took
Or like
months
Kill
of-
Bill that took a year.
Kill
That was
Bill,
great.
Kill Bill,
That
I
was
had
fun.
I had 2 birthdays on, so it was a long process. But the attitude that we try to take is if you want to say it's a limitation of a budget limitation or the limitation of less prep time, we try to turn that around and make it work for us, because sometimes if you have unlimited time, if you're forced into a compressed time where you have to come up with something, it kind of pulls things out of you. And sometimes it's better. Sometimes it's better to actually have a budget limitation and to work frugal. And so if you take that attitude, you end up in a better place, I think.
In some ways, that was the case in some of the Wes Anderson things, because it made it look more handmade. It made it look more, not necessarily juvenile, but it made it,
Well, analog, I would say.
yeah, maybe.
I would say both Quentin and Wes liked to play down visual effects, and a lot of their stuff, at least early on, was very in camera, low tech, analog. Particularly the Wes Anderson things, we would do things very much like a theater set with, a wire and, little curtains and things. And not until recently has visual effects become sort of a partner with the art department. And now so many movies, particularly the tentpole movies, which we kind of, I'm not belittling, but we try to not do, but they're visual effects things that meld with the art direction. And that, to me,
You like to design.
yeah,
Mhm.
I'm enjoying a movie like, the Conversation or something like that, where it's a smaller.
Yeah.
I'm curious, because watching Collateral and watching La La Land, we're caught up in the story and emotionally engaged. And your design, which is really strong, doesn't draw attention to itself. Like the Collateral, it helps the story. It helps tell us about the characters and the setting. But as we're watching it, my question is, is that a balancing act that I want the design to help tell the story, but I don't want to draw attention to it too much?
Well,
Yeah.
we're doing everything for the director. The director is the one that's steering the ship. And it's, I look at some of these movies from the 20s and the 30s and 40s where Cedric Gibbon would, they would do a set and do a painting, and then they would build the set, and then that's how they would shoot the movie. Things are a lot more fluid now and not as rigid, where a set gets delivered. A set will evolve right up until the moment of when camera is going to roll and then it gets captured. Things can change. An actor can bring up an idea. So we kind of roll with being open to not locking ourselves into a certain thing. Like some of our directors that we've worked with actually don't like to use storyboards. Like Quentin did not like to use storyboards because it limited him. It locked him into a certain thing. Only in the case where there would be a dangerous stunt or something, then you have to have a storyboard where everybody's looking at what you're doing so that nobody gets hurt. But
Yeah, I think what we do, if it does draw attention to itself, it's to serve the story. So if it's a fantasy thing, then yes,
Yeah,
we'll do that.
it would
But
be
if
what
it's-
Damien
if
is
it
asking.
If it is background, that also depends. I mean, if it's something, an anonymous location like really basic hospitals, hallways, then it serves just that purpose, a passageway. If it's a loner or something, and the apartment is very minimal with no clues as to what this person is, then that is a sort of, we're doing something even though there's nothing there by pulling things away and just having color. And then you're limited to just lighting and how the light comes into the room and how the silhouette of the actor moves in front of windows. So yes, we should be background when we need to be background. But then there's wonderful other things to play with.
It's contingent on the
Surfaces
story
and
and the
textures.
director. We haven't worked with Tim Burton, but all over the top stuff, or even Stanley Kubrick, who we love, like The Shining. So Sandy brought up like a hallway. Well, the hallways in the
Yeah, that's
hotel
true.
are like,
That's true.
with the carpet are like, oh,
Yeah.
and it's what the director wants.
Yeah.
Everything that we're doing is just and if Damien wants this to blossom into this epilogue finale at the end, which you saw in the little clip for La La Land, that's what we have to do. And that's a little over the top. But for the most part, like Collateral, it's kind of reality based. And that's.
But it creates the mood, and it creates
Yeah.
an environment that it's very powerful. It's very powerful. We need to get to Tarantino and Wes Anderson.
Okay.
Let's take a look at Inglourious Bastards.
Yes.
Monsieur Lapadite. Je vous remercie pour le lait et pour votre hospitalité. Il me semble que nous en avons terminé. Ah, mesdames, je vous remercie pour le temps que vous m'avez consacré. Nous n'ennuierons pas votre famille plus longtemps. Donc, monsieur, mesdemoiselles, je prends congé de vous et je vous dis adieu.
David and Sandy, one of my favorite movies is The Searchers. Is in my top 5. I think I've seen it 35 times. And,
Yeah.
tell us about the interior of the cabin is Ethan's sister's cabin in The Searchers. At least it's influenced by it. It's inspired by it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that and
Well,
what?
Quentin I don't think Quentin never told me exactly that that's what he was after. But in just knowing him from his other films, that's sort of where we went with at least the interior and the lone sort of house on the prairie look. And I remember our cohorts, art directors and things, they didn't really understand what we were doing with this house because it wasn't a true French farmhouse. It had its own sort of cabin-y look, but we knew that that's what he wanted.
Well, we having worked on all of the other Tarantino movies, which we've done 7, and up to this point, we know that he liked to work practical locations. And we were sent to Berlin to then scout, and we scouted Inglourious Bastards practical, and we found this incredible, wonderful farmhouse that was a collection of outbuildings and a farmhouse that was practical. And kind of at the 11th hour, Quentin made the decision that he wanted to change course and have everything built. So we found a location that then, so everything around the farmhouse except for the dirt on the ground was all built. We found a location that had distant buttes in the background. It was actually on the Czech border, a couple of hours south of Berlin. And that's why we went there and we built this stone farmhouse. And we did reference The Searchers for the interior. And we actually used that same reference for another Quentin movie, Kill Bill.
Kill Bill at the chapel.
But everything was built, and then we had this was again reference to your question about compressed time. We were brought to Berlin 10 weeks from shooting, and there was an enormous count of sets, and including things that were potentially dangerous, where we had big fire effects that were practical fire that we had to orchestrate where things were built. And we were working in Babelsberg Studio, which was the old propaganda studio done in Potsdam, Germany.
Even pre.
Yes, and we built this. So we built the set out on the Czech border. Then we built an interior on stage. It was a Marlene Dietrich stage, and then because there's a lot of dialogue, so that usually drives whether or not we need the security of being on a stage where it's quiet and your long takes of dialogue are not wrecked by an airplane going over or things like that. That was a problem with Reservoir Dogs. We had we actually had to we had sound issues being in a practical location in this warehouse that the art department had to solve. So, but the farmhouse was a reference as a French farmhouse, and Quentin wanted it a standalone. And again, bookending that scene, you have a lot of vehicles that were World War II vintage German support vehicles that were available to us had we not gone to Germany. So those are things that kind of were, to me, wonderful, that that came along with being at this this being in Germany doing this. I also had a wonderful art department that everything is timing, and the timing with this allowed us, we were going to be working alongside Roman Polanski, was scheduled to do, what was the movie that he was going to do? He was going to do a movie.
It's about a writer.
And
The Ghost Rider, the Ghost Rider.
And they lost their money, and the art department that was standing by to work with him were out of a job, and I just hired that whole art department. And then also, because we had a compressed amount of time, I hired the location department that did another fabulous movie called The Reader, which was a great movie.
Kate Winslet won the Academy Award.
Incredible. And so I had like the A team, and that's what helped us pull all of this off in a compressed amount of time.
But you mentioned, David, that originally you were supposed to do locations, and that Quentin changed his mind.
We
and
found everything.
Why did he explain to you why you?
I think in both cases, the work that had to be done, it would have been impossible. The little farmhouse, it was sort of a Rubik's Cube. We had the exterior and all the action that got in at the real place. So that was a full build. They're beautiful. Then there was the set so that he could get above it. They could do long takes of dialogue.
Yeah.
And then there was the underneath. So there's the basement. And then with the cinema, they had intended to build it in Babelsberg, which was the old
wooden studio,
yeah.
and it would have not worked
would've-
fire-wise. But
would've
my intention
burned it down.
was to find a wonderful practical farmhouse, which we found an incredible real location. And then when you when they shoot through the floor, you needed to kind of have camera do an ant farm look where you go below the floor and see the family hiding. That would have been a copy. We would have replicated the real farmhouse, but so we were going to build some of it anyway, but we ended up having to build everything.
And the cinema too.
And the cinema, because of the amount of fire, it's always it's an interesting kind of game thing that producers play, where they're trying to be frugal or make themselves look like they're trying to be frugal, and to try to be not building anything, and you do practical location. And that was the direction that we were sent. So we found an amazing cinema. We found an amazing projection booth. We found they were not in the same place like Collateral. It was different location. But at the very last minute, and Quentin was still in LA doing a lot of casting. So we were doing our work in Germany while he was casting and doing stuff in LA. And then the word just came to us that he wanted to build everything. So we were like, whoa, okay. So
that was good, actually.
Yeah.
That was a good.
Let's take a look at Kill Bill, that you also work with Quentin on.
did you find me?
I'm the man.
You mentioned, David, that Quentin, you worked with, there were two production designers for this film. You know, can you tell us why that choice was made?
I think, well, this was before Inglorious, and then Inglorious, he had me just come back and do, it was myself. But it was such a global project, Kill Bill, and it was always intended to be a single film, only until the editing process and Quentin not wanting to shorten things, it became two different movies, Volume 1 and Volume 2. But because there were many scenes shot in Beijing that had to also be, we were also prepping at the same time scenes all around California. There was a need to have two different art departments, and we worked together. Taneda, who was a Japan production designer, came. We were sharing, everything was all of the models that we were doing for the different sets. We would all meet together, but he actually was overseeing the construction of like the House of Blue Leaves, which was a big club restaurant in, and that was done all in Beijing. So there was just a physical need to have two of us working together. There was the complications of Taneda spoke very little English, so he had to have an interpreter. That made it a little hard. But we ended up, you know, doing a very good looking movie where it all kind of worked together. They did cut it into Volume 1 and Volume 2.
Correct. Sandy, you have somebody like Damien Chazelle who's paying homage to old Hollywood movies and Jack Demy and making, you know, harking back to all Hollywood. And then you have Quentin Tarantino, who is also in his own way saluting cinema as well. Is that, you know, can you tell us about that aspect of those
It's
two?
interesting. They're both such cinephiles, and they both, I think, have a love of there's certain films that they love, and there's certain, and Quentin especially, there's probably so many more movies than he's shared with us. He often shares films with us so that we have that's how he conveys information to a look. But after, I think for Kill Bill, there were a lot of at least Japanese films that, and probably Chinese films that we just hadn't seen that did influence him. It influenced his cutting. It influenced the sort of intensity of the Kill Bill 1 volume, the choreography of the fights and all. But even when we worked with Taneda just a little bit on House of Blue Leaves to try and pass on that information to him about this sort of Western aspect of his, it's sort of like How the West Was Won. If you watch that movie, you can see his pacing a lot.
But
there's
I think
slow moments, there's dialogue, there's very violent moments. But whereas House of Blue Leaves was almost like a saloon scene in a Western. And and that was not something that was obvious, but it was something that we sort of passed on.
well, you're doing, when you're working on a Quentin movie, you're doing it through, you're basically doing Quentin's world, which is an off-kilter, and that
Reality.
kind of through the German art department, who was really trying to do an accurate 1940s movie where, you know, the prop master said, well, they wouldn't have that type of wine there, you know, but Quentin will throw in these incongruous, almost comical things. Well, they're funny, and that's the way he works. So it was a little hard for that art department to do, as was with the Japan and the Chinese art department in Beijing. It took a little bit of learning to understand what we were doing and how Quentin works. And I kind of felt it was Sandy's and my responsibility to be, since we had a history with Quentin, we had to be kind of the host or the, you know, to kind of make their job more comfortable and easy and try to help them understand how he worked.
Well, you know, another
And-
thing I just thought of that those two shared a lot, Quentin and Damien, not only their love of a certain cinematic style, but they also, both of them shared the music of the film before we even started shooting. And that was really interesting. So it was it just gives you so much. It gives you
That's
pacing,
true,
it gives you
yeah.
energy. But Damien had his score already written. It wasn't completely orchestrated. And Quentin had picked at least 80% of the music that was going to appear.
And he
with the
played it
film.
for us while we were prepping. He actually called us into a room
Yeah.
and said, look, I want you to listen to this. This is how we're going to score these scenes. And that's exactly what they
Yeah.
used. He used these songs. He'll pick songs and cobble them together. And
Yeah. So
Mhm.
knowing both those things were so helpful.
Well, speaking of precision, let's take a look at Wes Anderson and the Royal Tenenbaums.
Royal Tenenbaum bought the house on Archer Avenue in the winter of his 35th year. Over the next decade, he and his wife had 3 children, and then they separated.
Are you getting divorced?
At the moment, no. But it doesn't look good.
Do you still love us?
Of course I do.
Do you still love Mom?
Yes, very much, but your mother's asked me to leave, and I must respect her position on the matter.
Was it our fault?
No. Oh, obviously, we made certain sacrifices as a result of having children, but no, Lord, no.
Then why'd she ask you to leave?
I don't really know anymore. Maybe I wasn't as true to her as I could have been.
Well, she says...
Let's just drop that, shall we, Chassie?
They were never legally divorced.
Thank you, Roberta.
Ethelene Tenenbaum kept the house and raised the children, and their education was her highest priority.
Yes, I'll hold, please. Thank you.
I need $187.
Write yourself a check.
Bene. Sì. Grazie mille.
She wrote a book on the subject.
The gentleman in the blue cardigan, please.
David and Sandy, you're both have such architectural and design expertise. And one of the things I love about Wes Anderson is spatial relationships and how he conveys so much I mean, that scene with Gene Hackman, you totally get who he is by the way he's framed and his relationship in the hall, etc. Was that something that made it exciting for you to be working with Wes?
well, it was
Yes.
all in this one practical house that that actually Wes found. We were working on another Gene Hackman movie, Heist, in Montreal, while he was in New York before they got their money to do Royal Tenenbaums, and he was driving around with a music supervisor, Randy Poster, and I guess they discovered this house in Harlem, and it was dilapidated. And said, I think we found this house. Can you come down and check it out and see if it'll work for the movie? So I flew down and looked at the house, and it was amazing. It was really run down, and the stairway inside, you could shake the stairway and the entire stairway would wobble. It was really dangerous, but he wanted to shoot the whole movie in the house. So we virtually dressed every room and every floor, including the roof. We had to build a falcon coop on the roof for the Richie character to have his falcon nest. But it was a Dutch architect, Adolf Hoek, H-O-A-K, that did this house in Harlem near in Hamilton Heights. So we ended up filming in Harlem when it was not really in vogue to be, you know, working up in Harlem. Bill Clinton ended up just taking an office up there. So we were kind of on our own and had this
yeah.
wonderful house to work in.
Wes's precision was just so, again, so important. It was sort of like the dialogue we were just speaking of with Quentin and Damien, because when you see that film, we just saw a little bit in this clip, there are several montages, and each montage has about 12 mini sets in them. We have to meet all of Emmeline's suitors. We have to see all of Margot's past. We have all the kids growing up as geniuses and the kids no longer as geniuses. And if we hadn't, again, in compressed time, if Quentin hadn't been Wes hadn't been so specific, it would have been very difficult to be so precise and effective with those montages. The colors, there was a series of colors with each beat. There are maybe a series of patterns. One would be flat proscenium, one is diagonal. So there's all these wonderful things that come together to make it all really interesting.
And what following up on what you just said, Cindy, Wes Anderson talks to you about that, about the proscenium framing, and I wanted to have a perspective.
Mostly in the script. It's mostly in the script, and it happens on the day. But most of his dialogue and long scenes in his first few movies, they were very symmetrical and straight on, whether they were group shots or, you know, head to toe, or one or two shots. They were very symmetrical.
I would say we developed that with Bob Yeoman early on, from the progression from Bottle Rocket to Rushmore to Royal Tenenbaums. He kind of became his thing. And then of course he carried that on to the other movies. Right. I will say,
even that square would become that kind of thing too.
Yeah.
You do that.
I will say also that the movie became a love letter to New York.
New York, yeah.
Because we shot it in 2000, right before the World Trade Center thing. So we captured New York, and again, it was a Wes Anderson look at New York. He wanted it to be New York, but not feature any of the iconic landmarks. Even we did a scene with Gene Hackman and Kumar Pagoda, and he had Kumar stand in front of the Statue of Liberty, so you blocked out the Statue of Liberty in the background. So he wanted to hide all that. We even did license plates. Like if you look at all of the gypsy cabs and things, there was a specific Wes Anderson license plate that was two-tone color, and we changed all the street signs. So wherever you saw a street sign, it was a Wes Anderson street sign. So we did this kind of bucolic, charming look of New York that was before everything changed. And people now look back at it as the last movie that's showing New York before everything changed. So it was kind of a nice fortuitous thing.
Sort of the New York of the New Yorker magazine. It's an older look.
Yeah.
Let's look at Bottle Rocket, which was your first, I mean, it was his first film and the first time you worked with Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
Okay, escape route is crucial, just in case somebody is tailing us or even chasing us, as the case may be. We can't be sure how it is going to happen.
Do you think that we're going to be chased tonight? Is that a possibility?
That's a good question. No, I don't think we're going to be chased. I'm just being hypocritical here. However, I will say, Bob, please don't interrupt me, man, because I'm trying to stay focused on this stuff. You're responsible for the external situation tomorrow, streets and the getaway.
Whoa, excuse me. Are the explosives really necessary here? I think it'd be a lot more simple if I just walk up to the door alone. I think that would be.
Why are you undermining me, man?
How much bullets does this thing take?
Bob,
Look,
please,
I'm paying
man.
attention.
God damn it! You're not paying attention if you're messing around with the gun. Now quit. Anthony, just keep the gun on the table. Keep.
And this is the film that you mentioned that Polly Platt was the producer of the film. And of course, for those who don't know, she's one of the greatest production designers. And tell us, David, how was it to have her as producer and your
Well, we were intimidated because she is our hero. Polly designed Last Picture Show,
Paper Moon.
She was married to Peter Bogdanovich. So she was the one that was sort of put in charge of overseeing Bottle Rocket. So we were sort of sent off to Texas to work on this movie with the then unknown Wes Anderson. He didn't have a track record, and the studio was a little nervous about this offbeat project. But Polly was really sort of functioned as producer and let us do our thing. Actually made, in many ways, like with me with the Japan production designer on Kill Bill, she made it comfortable for us to just do our job. And that was actually that one clip that you showed. It was, we are always kind of trying to weave in interesting architecture. That was the largest Frank Lloyd Wright residence that he ever built. And that happened to be in Dallas. And we happened to managed to get it for the movie. So that was kind of a nice thing.
And David, is that something that you wanted that house? Or, I mean,
Wes is from there. Wes is actually from Houston, but we were in, it was his home state. So we were in Dallas. And I try to, when I go to a city, I try to go through the Society of Architects and get either a guide and look at what interesting buildings are around. And that's how I find different locations that will work for a movie. And I do that wherever I am. And in Dallas, we ended up with that. Wes wanted to use an amazing house that was owned by Ann Bass in Fort Worth that was just due west a little bit by Paul Rudolph, who's another modernist architect, but she turned us down for that would have been for the house that the Frank Lloyd Wright house ended up.
And going back to what you mentioned earlier, Sandy, that there's a very specific perspective and look to his film. And you see it in that scene in the Frank Lloyd Wright when they're at the table. Is that something that he developed? Or before you guys started shooting, that's how he wanted things to look?
That's how he wanted things to look. He definitely had that. He actually did storyboards. They were very minimal. They were almost like stick figures, but he did have things set up that way. His perspective was very careful. I'd love to know exactly. I can't tell you where that came from.
There is the influence of Ozu, the Japanese director. When I watch Wes Anderson's films, I see the sort of influence.
Yes, and some still photographers
and
too.
The French New Wave stuff also. Yeah.
He liked Los Samurai. That's totally different, but he liked the way that looked, which was very with French New Wave, very simple, very direct. Yeah.
But Wes would show us in pre-production, as well as with Quentin in pre-production and Damien, they would show movies that would help convey to the crew what they would like the movie to end up being like. So Wes would show us different things. I don't remember what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't either.
Well, there is so much I want to talk to you, and I keep looking. Oh my God, we've been talking for an hour, and
Thank you for doing
and no, but I want to bring up the fact that your earlier films, El Norte. You also did one film that I adore, Smooth Talk with Laura Dern, one of her earliest works, and now they're finding their way onto Criterion Collection. Tell us about working on those two films.
Well, early on, and that's what sort of gave us the taste of working on a quality, on a good story or well written. El Norte was actually nominated for Best Screenplay of the Year for an Oscar in 1984. So it was very well written. I connected with that group. It was actually a small group of UCLA students. It was Gregory Nava, who of course directed Selena, Mi Familia, fantastic. And Jim Glennon, the cameraman, who is the son of Burt Glennon, who shot all of the John Ford Westerns, amazing Westerns. So Jim shot El Norte, and we got, he saw that I was able to do low budget and was able to be hands-on. And his second film was Smooth Talk, which was Laura Dern. Laura Dern was fresh off of Mask, a Peter Bogdanovich movie. Fantastic movie, but she wasn't the lead. She was offered the lead in this Joyce Carol Oates short story that Joyce Chopra directed. So again, here's another heavyweight writer, Joyce Carol Oates, fantastic.
Yeah.
So her husband, the director's husband, Tom Cole, another a heavyweight writer who won a Tony for Medal of Honor Rag play. He writes a screenplay, brilliant screenplay. So this is what sort of started us looking for carefully pursuing well-written projects. Now, Smooth Talk, you're correct in that Criterion, they just reached out to me. They restored the movie. They had a very interesting panel discussion with the three women from Smooth Talk. It was Joyce Chopra, the director, Joyce Carol Oates, the writer, and Laura Dern. Last year's New York Film Festival did a wonderful Zoom meeting like ours here now. And that's kind of what got us interested in doing a quality project. So our early stuff, a lot of it was American Playhouse, which had a string of doing theatrical projects that would appear in a movie theater first, like Smooth Talk, like El Norte, but then it would appear on American Playhouse. So it was quality
Early
things.
indies, early Sundance.
Yeah, modestly budgeted. I believe El Norte, I may be wrong, is the earliest, as the first independent movie, independent feature film, I believe.
To win an
Could
Oscar.
have been Testament, but I think El Norte was. So actually, one of the things that we're working on now, and it kind of got put on hold with the pandemic, UCSB has a wonderful art design and architecture museum. They reached out to us, Sylvia Pura, the director, had an interesting idea, and they said, David and Sandy, why don't we do an exhibit at the museum? It's actually a very nice museum, sizable. And they said, let's pick 4 movies that are with a backdrop of Los Angeles, and each movie is 10 years apart, and showcase this as a exhibit idea. So that's what we were working on until the pandemic kind of came about, and they kind of locked down the campus. But it was El Norte, Collateral, Pulp Fiction, and La La Land, all very different movies, but each movie
a part of LA.
featured LA as a character
in
Let's
LA.
go back to-
and LA architecture.
Yeah.
So we're
Well,
hoping that that comes back up.
well, I'm definitely gonna check that out the moment it opens. Look forward to that. Well, both Sandy and David, this has been amazing. I could actually go on talking to you guys for another hour about
Thank you.
movies.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for making the time. And
Oh, it was
um,
great. We got, yeah.
We're honored.
yeah, well, I'm a big fan of your work, and
Oh,
and I look forward to what you guys do next.
Next.
So
Thank
Okay.
you.
yeah, well, enjoy your evening. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye.
Okay, see you.